Hello, my name is Mary Holland, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer at Children's Health Defense. And it's an honor to speak to you, parliamentarians and others in Poland. I am pleased that many years ago I traveled to Poland, and it has a very special place in my heart. And it especially has a place in my heart right now as you are facing universal vaccine mandates for children that I personally deeply oppose, but also that my organization, Children's Health Defense, opposes. So I want to talk to you for a few minutes about several issues. I want to talk to you about our position at Children's Health Defense about mandates for any kind of medicine, including vaccines. I want to talk to you about vaccine injuries that are common. I want to talk to you about how we can change the system. And I want to talk to you a little bit about Children's Health Defense. And let me just start with a little bit about Children's Health Defense. We were founded by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and he served then as our chairman and litigation counsel, but he has now left. We are expecting for him to be appointed and confirmed by the U.S. Senate for the position of Health and Human Services Secretary. So he is completely dissociated now from Children's Health Defense. He will be in the government. We are a non-governmental organization. But many of the things that I will say are certainly ideas that he takes with him into the government. And whether he can enact them is a different question, but he certainly knows these things and believes in them as he was a founder of this organization. So our position on mandates is that there should never be any mandates when it comes to medicine. And this is not a radical idea. So coming out of World War II, and Poland suffered greatly in World War II, there was a prosecution of Nazi doctors in particular in Nuremberg, and a Nuremberg Code was issued, and U.S. lawyers, including the former member of the U.S. Supreme Court, were part of the drafting of that Nuremberg Code that said the informed consent of the individual is absolutely essential. And that was about experimentation. There had been massive experimentation on people in concentration camps. But since the 1940s, that prohibition against forced medicine has come to include preventive medicine, treatment, and experimentation. And so we believe that all medical procedures have to have transparency. People have to be well informed. They have to know what are the risks and benefits of the disease or the condition, and they have to know what are the risks and benefits of the treatment or the vaccine or the medical device. Anything related to medicine, in our view, must be based on information, and there must be real consent. That nullifies any idea that there could possibly be forced medicine, and mandates are forced vaccination medicine. So we absolutely oppose mandates. We do not oppose vaccination if an individual wants it. I do believe that in general, we've gotten such poor information about vaccines that most people have not made truly informed choices. So I do personally believe that when people have more information about vaccines, they will make more choices to reject them when it is entirely voluntary. In the United States, in some states, 5 states, including the state where I am, New York, vaccination is not voluntary for children to attend school. We do not have what's called a religious exemption, and our medical exemption, which is required by law, has been made completely ineffective through persecution of doctors who grant medical exemptions. So in New York, families that don't choose to vaccinate their children must either leave the state, which they have, or they must homeschool their children. And I'm aware that in many European countries, homeschooling is unfortunately not an option. It is in the US, but we absolutely oppose mandates. We also think that the science has evolved greatly. I want to show you a book. So by my colleague, Robert Kennedy and Brian Hooker, they recently wrote a book, Vax, Unvax, Let the Science Speak. And this is a book that looks at all of the studies that have been published comparing vaccinated and unvaccinated outcomes for children in every category, whether it is allergies, asthma, autism, attention deficit disorder. The children who are not vaccinated are healthier. They have fewer medical complications. They are simply far and away healthier than the children who have been vaccinated at any level. And the children who receive fewer vaccines are healthier than the children who received more vaccines. That is the science. In other words, that is what the truthful information shows. I also want to recommend to you another book that I helped to co-edit. This is by Israeli authors who are anonymous, called Turtles All the Way Down, Vaccine Science and Myth. I believe this book is already in Polish. I'm not certain of that. But this book also really explores whether or not the vaccines that are available today globally have been adequately tested for safety. And the answer is a resounding no. They have not been adequately tested for safety. And it explains what is, on some levels, a criminal enterprise to keep people uninformed about the risks of vaccines and to exaggerate the fears of the diseases against which vaccines are aimed. None of these diseases that are being vaccinated against are truly lethal diseases for well-nourished children with good sanitation and clean water, which thankfully is the case in Europe and the United States today. So the second topic that I was asked to talk about is complications from vaccines. So we are told in the United States, and I imagine you are told in Poland, that vaccines are safe and effective, and that complications or injuries from vaccines are extremely rare. We're often told that serious adverse effects are 1 in a million. Those are simply lies. Legally in the United States, since Congress passed a law in 1986, vaccines are considered unavoidably unsafe. And for that reason, Congress gave the pharmaceutical industry a blanket liability policy and healthcare workers blanket liability protection, so that if people die or are injured, they cannot sue the manufacturer or the doctors or nurses. They can only go to a government-run compensation program that does not work. So we know that vaccines are very dangerous. A study that was done in 2010 that is discussed in this Turtles All the Way Down book makes it clear that the Centers for Disease Control in the United States commissioned a study about the effects of vaccines and the level of adverse events. And they used machine learning. So they used a clinic with thousands of people, and they found that the rate of injury was about 1 in 40. About 1 in 40 people had a serious enough effect from their vaccine to have to come back to the clinic for some kind of attention. This is not what they're saying. And I think the world saw this kind of level of complication, of a very high level of complication with the COVID shots. And we also have demographic information that suggests to us that the ordinary level of death was the same in 2020 as it had been in 2019 before COVID. But by 2021 and 2022, when the COVID shots were made available, the death rate increased significantly. That suggests but in and of itself doesn't prove that the shots were causing death in a significant number of people. So we know that vaccines are not, we know that they are not perfectly safe for all people. Just as we are all different on the outside with different hair color and different color eyes and different builds and different abilities and different perspectives, different skills, we are that different on the inside as well. We are genetically and environmentally, epigenetically, all different from one another. And the very notion that it's appropriate to force people to take one kind of a intervention, one injection, and that will be safe for everybody is really a crazy idea. We are not the same, and we do not respond to things in the same way, and we will not get the same protection in the same way. That's simply the complexity of the human condition. What are the kind of complications that we see that do relate to vaccines? They're myriad. They relate to the vulnerabilities of the individual. It can be allergies. That's very, very common. And they can be severe allergies, so that if you come into contact with peanuts or fish, you could literally die of an anaphylactic shock. But it's also asthma has been shown to be associated with vaccination. Attention deficit disorder is associated. Cancer in children is associated. Autism is associated. Paralytic disorders like paralysis is associated. All of these things, I said attention deficit, learning disabilities is associated. Dyspraxia, apraxia, anxiety, all of these bipolar, all of these things are connected, can be connected to vaccination. And of course, because the medical journals and the medical establishment work hand in glove with the pharmaceutical industry, and the pharmaceutical industry is wealthy and very powerful, the connections between vaccines and these complications and these adverse conditions is not well studied, and the information about it is suppressed. We saw widespread censorship about adverse reactions to the COVID shots in the last few years. But this is the truth. I am hopeful that the truth will come out. I'm very, very hopeful that in the next few years, we will see a lot more truthful information related to these conditions. Possibility of changing the system. Well, we at Children's Health Defense are absolutely devoted to changing this system. Our goal is within 10 years at the latest to end the epidemic of chronic childhood disease. We believe that this is environmental. This has literally happened in the last 40 years, 45 years ago. It was a very small minority of children who had developmental disabilities like autism. Today, that number is 1 in 33 in the United States. It's similar in many other developed countries. Obviously, this is not genetic. We don't have genetic epidemics. So we have to assume that we have environmental exposures that are causing these really, not only on a human level, terrible tragedies, but economically too, these conditions in children are extremely expensive to our societies. But to the pharmaceutical industry, and it is a global industry, it's very lucrative to have a sick child. There's nothing more lucrative to the pharmaceutical industry than a sick child, because they then become customers for life. And so we are dedicated to the prospect that we can end that epidemic of chronic childhood disease. So let me say a few words about Children's Health Defense. As I say, our mission is to end the epidemic of chronic childhood disease. During the last few years, during COVID, we stepped out of that exclusive focus on children because the whole world, the whole global population was being subjected to lies about COVID and also to mandates of the COVID injections. I don't personally consider them to have been vaccines, in that they didn't stop infection or transmission. They were gene therapies according to what they should have been considered. and they sadly caused extensive harm. So we did scale up to work on COVID, but we are now kind of moving back to our roots, which is to focus on ending the chronic epidemic of childhood illnesses and conditions. A primary focus is vaccines, as we've discussed, but we also have a very robust program focusing on electromagnetic radiation. In a very similar way, the government has really fused with industry in the telecommunications area and has disallowed local communities from saying that they don't want telecom antennas or they don't want telecom towers in residential areas or at schools or at hospitals. Federal law, which is very favorable towards the telecom industry, has made it impossible for local communities to exercise their own choice, their own discretion. So it's a very similar issue that informed consent to the individual and to the community is being obliterated. And we oppose that. There has to be local control. There has to be individual control when radiation is at play. And again, every person is going to have a different response to radiation from a nearby source. Radiation can cause death. It can cause cancer. It can cause migraines. It can cause all kinds of very serious health conditions or exacerbate them. We also report in our daily work. We have this a CHD TV channel that goes out every day with live reporting. We have a newsletter that we send to people's inboxes for free called The Defender. We report on other toxic exposures as well, pesticides, water pollution, including fluoride. We cover all of the toxic exposures that are affecting childhood health. We believe in the possibility to change the system. We are delighted to see that Robert Kennedy, our founder, is headed towards being the Secretary of Health. I do believe that his guiding principles are consistent with ours. But when he is in the government, we know that that is complicated. We can't always expect him to be doing exactly what we would hope that he can do. So we will stay the course. We will be giving out truthful information about vaccines and about other toxic exposures every day. There are many, many ways to improve the situation, at least in the United States. But I believe similar solutions can be enacted in other countries. First, we have to get rid of mandates, right? So if the first step is to create exceptions like we have in the United States, that's a good first step, right? So we need in the United States religious exemptions or philosophical exemptions in every state. We need to have real medical exemptions so that if a doctor can say this child is at high risk of an adverse reaction, that is respected by the schools or by employers. We can't have any employment mandates again, as we did during COVID. I think eventually we have to get rid of mandates for schools. We can have recommendations from the government, and those recommendations have to be backed by science. We can certainly have the government immediately put up on its websites truthful information about vaccines, looking at the risks and benefits of diseases, as well as the risks and benefits of vaccines. We can also have the government make available the data that they have collected about vaccines and about just generally people's health. Governments have enormous repositories of information that should be evaluated by any scientist, not just by scientists that are approved by the government. We have to end gain of function research, which is a euphemism for bioweapons research. Sadly, bioweapons research is intricately entwined with vaccines, vaccines being the antidote to exposure to bioweapons. This research has caused many of the pandemics of the past. It seems to have caused the COVID epidemic based on bioweapons research sponsored by the United States in China at the Wuhan laboratory. We need to end bioweapons research, probably through a global treaty. We need not to endorse the World Health Organization's pandemic treaty that they're still trying to push forward. I do believe the World Health Organization has been behind the vaccine mandates worldwide and behind the gain of function research worldwide. And I encourage the United States to leave the World Health Organization. I think it's a corrupt organization and it can't be easily reformed today. There are many other things that we can do focused on the conflicts of interest between industry and government in the United States. There's a revolving door between people in government agencies and the pharmaceutical industry. The pharmaceutical industry contributes to foundations, private foundations that help to fund the organization. The pharmaceutical industry pays for applications for its new drugs and new vaccines directly to the Food and Drug Administration. All of these things corrupt the independence of the government to do its job, which is to protect we, the people, not the industry. Another lever for that is that scientists at the National Institutes of Health can receive royalties for research that they do on taxpayer money. They can get royalties from the pharmaceutical companies. Obviously, that's corrupting the ability of government to be independent. So I think we have to end, as Robert Kennedy has often said, we have to end the corrupt merger of industry and government, particularly in this pharmaceutical area where really the stakes are life and death. But I have to say I'm extremely optimistic. I think one of the results of COVID was that it woke up millions, if not billions of people around the world to the corrosion and the corruption between the pharmaceutical industry and public health, so-called, in governments. And I do believe that we can turn this around. I really believe that within a very short time, more and more people will come to understand what we're talking about, that there can be no medical mandates ever going forward in the future, that people have to have truthful information to be able to make good decisions, and that we can turn around the epidemic of chronic childhood illness. Thank you so much.